Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'm going to show you how to deploy a Blazor Server app to Azure, move the SignalR piece out of your app and into Azure SignalR service, scale up the SignalR service to support up to 100,000 concurrent users, and then I'll show you how to scale up your Blazor app with more memory and CPU power, and finally, configure your app to scale out up to 10 instances dynamically based on CPU load. And that's all coming up right now.
When?
Right here.
Where?
Shut up! Right here on Blazor Train! All right, I've got a standard Blazor server application here called Scaling Blazor Server Demo. And before I do anything, let's just run this so that we can do a little refresher to see actually how things work with SignalR in a Blazor server application. And there it is. So I'm going to press F12 to bring up the tools, go to the network tab, disable the cache, turn on recording. This is Chrome. I'm going to right click on the refresh button and then select do a empty cache and hard reload. That's a right click and select empty cache and hard reload. That's your friend. All right, so take a look here at the WebSocket, and it is looking at localhost. That's our application _ Blazor, right? This is the SignalR service in our Blazor application handling all these things. And you can see the messages as we, click the button, messages come and go, all right? So you should know this by now if you've been paying attention. Now, this is a new Azure account I created. It's free if you go to azure.com and say, get started for free. There's no resources here. This is a brand new account because there's no resource groups. All resources must belong to a resource group in Azure, so fresh start, okay? And we're going to right-click on the application, select Publish. I'm going to select Azure because that's where I want to go. And also, I want to make an Azure app service, a Windows app service. Could be Linux, but I want Windows. And so this is where I get to pick what app service I want. There are none here, but if there were, I could dig into the list and pick an app service to publish to. But as it is, I need to select this green plus here to create a new Azure app service. So let's do. Okay, a couple things you'll notice here. First of all, the name, I get a whole bunch of trailing numbers there I don't want. Same with the resource group. It's going to create a new resource group, but it's going to give me this wacky name. And the hosting plan. So these are the three things that you need to be sure of. Also, your subscription. This is the subscription that I'm currently using that has no resources in it, okay? So let's just do this. Let's call this Scaling Blazor Server Demo, and the resource group I'm going to change to Scaling Blazor Service Demo -RG for resource group, and the hosting plan. Now this is where it gets interesting. Check this out. First of all, I'll pick a name that I like, get rid of that stuff. The location, pick a location near you. It's not that important, and sometimes certain resources are available only in certain locations, but for this, I know that East US is near me. That's what I'm going to do. And the size, I'll get to that in a second. Let's just do this. So here's our hosting plan. I'm going to call it dash plan. The location, I'm going to pick East US. Now the size. This is your first opportunity to scale. By default, you get 1 core and 1.75 gigs of RAM. Now, we know that with 1 core and 3.5 gigs of RAM, that Blazor Server can, even without SignalR service, support about 5,000 users. But this guy right here with 4 cores and 14 gigs of RAM, Blazor Server can support 20,000 concurrent users before, and this is according to Microsoft's tests, before the latency goes above 200 milliseconds. In other words, I click something, and if I don't see a response in 200 milliseconds or less, that is what we consider not being able to support a client. So in their tests, just out of the box, if you use this big old honkin' SKU here, you'll be able to support 20,000 comfortably concurrent users. All right, but I'm going to stick with the basic one, me personally, right here. But this is your first opportunity to scale, and that's scaling up, right? Bigger box, still only one box. We'll talk about scaling out in a minute. So I'm creating this app service, and now through the magic of video, see what I did there? Okay, now I'm going to finish, and now we haven't actually published yet. All we've done is created an app service to which we are going to publish our application. Now, if we go over to my resource groups and I do a refresh, you'll see that I've created this Scaling Blazor Server Demo resource group. And inside that, I've got two resources, the app service and the app service plan. The plan is where you do your auto scaling. All right, so we'll get to that in a second, but let's go into the app service itself. Now I'm going to pull this up on the side menu here, configuration, because there is a setting that you should check off, and it's under general settings, and it is WebSockets. Turn it on. Now, if you don't turn it on, it's still going to work, except that it will use, SignalR will use long polling, which works everywhere, but it's not state of the art, and it isn't as scalable as WebSockets. So you want to turn on WebSockets if you've got a Blazor Server application. This always on, essentially, when you turn this on, it doesn't shut down due to inactivity, which, you know, currently the way it's set up, it's going to save you some money, but it's not really good for scaling. If you want to scale, crank this up. Now, I just want to also talk about ARR affinity. This is otherwise known as stickiness. And if we had multiple servers, it means that, you know, when I create a session, for lack of a better word, I start using an application and I'm using it, I don't want to then be shipped off to another server, because I want the server that I'm using always to be my server. Now, somebody else could come in and get shipped off to another server with a load balancer. Again, we'll talk about scaling out in a minute. But this is definitely good to have on if you're going to scale. Save. Yes. Okay, now let's just publish. Now I know that we've got this SignalR service thing right here. I'll talk about that in a minute, but let's just publish it first without the SignalR service, and we'll see what happens. And there it is. So, scaling Blazor server demo.azurewebsites.net, that's where this is. And essentially, this is the same as our local version. In other words, the SignalR service is hosted in the application itself. And, you know, just to be sure, let's look at the network tab and do our little trick again. And let's look at our WebSocket, and you can see that, yes, it's not localhost anymore. Now it's got a real URL, scaling Blazor server demo.azurewebsites.net. But this is definitely not the SignalR service. We haven't introduced that yet. That's what we're going to do now. Now it says right here on the publish page, SignalR, your application is making use of SignalR. For environments that need to scale, we strongly recommend adding a dependency on the Azure SignalR service. So let's just do it. And I do recommend using the Visual Studio Wizard to do this. It is easy enough to select a SignalR service that you've already created. It would be right here in this list. But it's just as easy to create from here. And using the wizard, it's going to automatically download the NuGet package and update your profile and put the application secrets on Azure. So I recommend using this method. So we don't have an Azure SignalR service, so we're going to create one. And again, we have some options here. I'm going to put a dash SignalR right there for the resource name. The resource group should be selected already. We only have one. East US is my location. Now the SKU defaults to standard. So there are two options here, free and standard. And here are the differences. So this is the Azure SignalR service pricing page at Microsoft Azure. And I've selected my region, East US. And now you can see that there are these two SKUs here. So you get for free per unit, and we'll talk about that in a minute, 20 concurrent connections, 20,000 messages per day, and 1 unit. So a unit you can think of as a SignalR server or service somewhere out in the cloud. Now standard is a pay service. You get 1,000 concurrent connections per unit, but you also get up to 100 units. So that means you can scale up to 100,000 concurrent users. Okay? The messages per day are unlimited, but they're free for the first 1,000,000 messages per unit. So if you turn this all the way up to 100 units, you get 100 million messages per day before you have to pay anything. And essentially the price per unit per day is $1.61. So for $161 per day, you can have the ultimate scalable SignalR service. But this is a knob that you can change at any time. So I'm going to select the free SKU. And through the magic of video, poof, there it is. Now, again, if I had an existing SignalR service in this subscription, it would be listed right here. And I could just click on it to select it. So I'll click Next. And now we have some more decisions to make. So the Azure SignalR service is accessible via a connection string. You don't want to put it in your code. You definitely don't want it in an app settings JSON file. So what their default setting is, or option, is to put it in an Azure app setting, or Azure app settings. There's like 3 of them, I think, that it uses. And in doing that, you just put it on Azure itself. It doesn't ever go in your repo or anything like that. You can also use Azure Key Vault. And if you can create a new key vault with this wizard. If you select this, you can use an existing key vault, but then you're going to store the key vault URL in Azure app settings. So either way, there's going to be an app setting. And by the way, the key vault URL is just a URL. There's no secrets. So it's not something that anybody could just use, find, use, and hack. So we're going to select the default Azure app settings. And let's just go look at the resource group now and refresh it. And we can see that there's the SignalR service. And remember, we talked about the SKU, the scale. And look at this. You can change your pricing tier from free to standard, and you can also up the unit count. Right now it's only 1, but if I selected standard here, now I can go all the way up to 100 units. Pretty cool, huh? All right, we're going to discard those changes and get back to our code. So I'm going to click Next. And this is great. This wizard is now telling you all the changes it's going to make, right? It's going to add those settings to Azure App Service. And by the way, let's go look at what those settings currently are, the application settings. And that would be right here in the Scaling Blazor Server demo, and go to Configuration. These are the application settings that it currently has. Just website node default version, and it's something like 6.9.1, whatever it is. There's only one setting in there. Okay? It's going to add a NuGet package for SignalR service. It's going to change my profile properties so that we can use the new dependency. It's going to add that connection string to a local secret store. Doesn't get checked into your repo if you're using version control. And also this settings in app settings JSON, That is a very benign setting. There's no passwords, there's nothing. It's just a switch that tells your app to use the SignalR service. So I like that it tells you what it's going to change. And I've got it on automatically close when succeeded. It has succeeded, and now we can publish. And here's our new application. I'm going to press F12 and do the old network trick again. So now you can see if we hover over the WebSocket that we're using the SignalR service right there instead of our local machine. And that's how you know that we're using the SignalR service. Now, what does that mean? The SignalR service is actually a proxy, and it manages the SignalR connection between services in the cloud. And it maintains very fast connections between those SignalR services and your application. So it's really efficient for using, even the free layer. Even if you're not planning on scaling up, it's a lot more efficient. All right, let's talk about scaling out. Now, scaling up means increasing the memory and CPU of your application service. Scaling out means more instances. So the way we're going to start is by adding application insights to our scaling Blazor Server demo app service. And there's a little tag right here. You can go down to application insights here under settings. Either way, we're just going to turn it on and use the default. And yeah, there I am. Apply. Apply. Turn it on, apply, and wait till it's done before you move on. All right, now that's done. Let's go to the hamburger menu and select monitor. Again, I'm going to have to move out of the way, but let me actually, how about that monitor? Yeah, monitor. Okay, so now that we got monitor, you can scroll down and search for auto scale. It's right there. Now you're going to see a list of all of the resources in your subscription that support auto scaling. Virtual machines support auto scaling. App services also support auto scaling. You don't scale the app service, you scale the app service plan. So let's click on the plan. And I got to duck down again. All right, so you see that, right? This is the manual scale, which is the first setting, the default setting. And I can up the instance count manually just by dragging this slider over, and I can go up to 10. But I can also do a custom auto scale. You can scale on a schedule or based on metrics. And the default metric is CPU. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to select add a rule. And the default rule is a 70% CPU rule. So when the CPU is greater than 70% for 10 minutes, we're going to increase the count by 1 with a cooldown of 5 minutes. And here's what it says for cooldown. The amount of time to wait after a scale operation before scaling again. For example, if cooldown is 10 minutes and a scale operation just occurred, auto scale will not attempt to scale again until after 10 minutes. This allows the metrics to stabilize first. And you can see that the default is 5 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it. And then I'm going to save. So also notice the instance limit. A minimum of 1 instance, a maximum of 2. I can increase that to 10. So now I can auto scale all the way up to 10 instances if I want to for this application. It doesn't have to be a Blazor app. This works on auto scaling on any resource that allows for auto scale. So I'm just going to hit 10 and hit save. And that is all I have to do to scale a Blazor server application, not only the SignalR service, but the app itself can go up to 10 instances based on high CPU load. And we get a load balancer for free. We don't even need to configure it. It's just there. That's really cool. Thanks, Microsoft. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. I think it's important to say that there's scaling and then there's uber scaling. Blazor Server is a great solution to scale up to somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 concurrent users. But if you look at the Uber sites like Facebook and Twitter, they are in another league altogether. For example, just the other day, Slack was hosting 12.5 million concurrent users. One of them was me, for sure. I think it was number 4,365,921, or maybe 22. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze a trail.